Sandra stepped into Chief Martin's palatial mansion, and immediately, a sense of unease crept over her. The grandeur of the place was overwhelming: ornate chandeliers, expensive marble floors, and luxurious furniture that gleamed under the soft golden lights. It was the home of a man accustomed to power, wealth, and control. To her surprise, the house guards and maids treated her like royalty. They ushered her in with deep respect, their voices almost reverent. "Madam, please come this way. Ah, she's even more beautiful in person. Chief has been expecting you. He said to treat you well." Sandra's stomach tightened. Why were they acting like this? She was led into a lavishly decorated sitting room with tall glass windows that overlooked a beautiful garden. She sat stiffly on the leather couch, her heart pounding. She had come to clear the air to let Chief Martins know she was already engaged. But why did this place feel like a trap? After a long wait, Chief Martins finally emerged. He was dressed in flowing royal blue robes, a gold chain resting heavily on his broad chest. Beside him walked an equally wealthy-looking man, a close friend by the way they conversed in hushed tones. The moment Chief Martins laid his eyes on her, his lips curled into a pleased smirk. He stood still for a moment, taking in her appearance like a man sizing up a fine piece of jewelry. His eyes gleamed with amusement and something else, satisfaction. "Ah, finally," he said, turning slightly to his friend. "Look at her, just look at her. A beautiful, innocent damsel, pure, elegant. My very taste." Sandra felt bile rise in her throat. Something about his tone made her skin crawl. With a snap of his fingers, he called one of the maids. "Go to the fridge and bring out the ice-chilled papaw fruit. Make sure it is the sweet one. Our guest needs to be refreshed." Sandra watched as the maid hurried away. A chill ran down her spine. This man was far too confident, too assured of something she had not agreed to. Then, as she sat quietly, she overheard something that nearly stopped her heart. His friend, laughing softly, leaned toward him and asked in a hushed voice, "Who is she?" Chief Martins answered with pride and finality, "She is my intended wife. A perfect replacement for my late wife." Sandra's body went rigid. "What?" Her hands gripped the edge of her seat as waves of disbelief crashed over her. Her father had sent her here like a sacrificial lamb, knowing full well what this was about. She felt her pulse quicken. She wanted to stand up and run. But she knew better. This was a man of influence, a man who was not used to being told no. If she reacted wrongly, he could manipulate the situation, twisting it to his advantage. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She bowed her head and prayed. Her lips moved silently, her heart crying out to God for wisdom and deliverance. She prayed over the fruit that was placed before her, knowing she could not afford to be careless in such a place. As she prayed, another conversation caught her attention. This time, they were speaking in their local dialect. They thought she wouldn't understand. But she did. The chief's friend leaned in and whispered in a low, warning voice, "Martins, I must warn you. This praying mantis." He gestured at Sandra subtly, lowering his voice further. "She will be the one to kill you. This scripture union girl will send you to an early grave with her prayers." Sandra's heart pounded. The words were spoken not as a joke, but as a prophecy. Chief Martins chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "You worry too much," he said, amused. "She's young, she's beautiful, and I have my ways." The man sighed heavily. "I've said my own. Take it or leave it. As for me, let me be going." And with that, the man rose abruptly and excused himself, casting Sandra one last knowing glance before leaving. The heavy doors shut behind him. And then, she was left alone with Chief Martins. Sandra swallowed hard. The true battle had just begun. What will Chief Martins say now that they are alone? Will Sandra escape his grip, or will she be forced into an even more dangerous situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others. Chief Martin's gaze lingered on Sandra for a moment, and then, to her utter astonishment, he suddenly commanded, "Let's go and meet your parents." Sandra nearly gasped aloud. "What?" She almost didn't believe her ears. Chief Martins wanted to take her home? Before she could process it, he turned sharply and barked, "Guard, bring my car keys." Sandra jumped up from the couch. her heart racing, not out of fear, but from overwhelming relief. She was free. As if released from a trap, she practically ran toward the door, praising God under her breath. She had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. Me? Marry Chief Martins. A man older than my own father. Me? A replacement for his dead wife? Me? A praying mantis that would send him to an early grave? If only they knew, prayer truly works wonders. She bit her lip to keep from laughing aloud. God had delivered her. As they stepped outside, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz was already waiting. A uniformed driver held the door open, but Chief Martins shook his head and took the driver's seat himself. Sandra, sit at the back. She obeyed, sliding into the plush leather seat, her body tense but her heart full of gratitude. As he started the engine and the car pulled out of the mansion's massive gates, Sandra saw him watching her through the front windscreen mirror. Then, to her discomfort, he started asking her funny questions. Beautiful lady, what do you call your name? Sandra cleared her throat, keeping her voice steady. Sandra. So. Oh, Sandra, what a beautiful name for a beautiful girl like you. Your parents must be very thoughtful to give you such a fine and beautiful name. Sandra forced a polite smile, praying he wouldn't change his mind halfway and turn back. You are a graduate of which university? He continued. University of Lagos, sir. Ah, Unilag. Good school. How old are you? 23, sir. 23. Very young and promising. Sandra responded courteously to every question, praying that he would ask the one question she was waiting for. And then, as if reading her mind, he finally asked, Are you engaged? Sandra did not hesitate. Yes, of course, she exclaimed joyfully. The man's hands gripped the steering wheel slightly. His voice lost a bit of its casual tone. And did your parents accept and approve of him? With undeniable joy in her voice, Sandra responded, Yes, of course. At that, Chief Martins went completely silent. Not another word passed between them until the car pulled up in front of Sandra's family house. What will happen when Chief Martins meets Sandra's father? Will her father still force her into this unwanted arrangement, or will this shocking visit bring a surprising turn of events? As Sandra's feet touched the pavement in front of her family home, a sense of unease settled in her chest. Something wasn't right. Her mother, who rarely smiled at her these days, was standing at the main front door with open arms, beaming like she had just won a grand prize. Sandra's heart pounded. That door was never used. For as long as she could remember, everyone entered through the kitchen door except on rare, special occasions. Her mother's wide grin made Sandra feel as if she had walked into a trap. The second thing that struck her was the sweet, rich aroma wafting from the kitchen. Spiced meats, jollof rice, fried plantains, exotic stew. It smelled like a feast. Then, she saw them, her father, siblings, and even the younger cousins who barely lived in the house. All of them were dressed in their best clothes, their faces glowing with excitement as if they were preparing to celebrate a grand occasion. And then, as if rehearsed, they all spoke in unison. Welcome, Chief. You are welcome. We've been expecting you. Her mother clapped her hands joyfully. Your food is ready, Chief. Please, come to the dining. Her father, her once proud, commanding father, bowed repeatedly, rising and bowing again, his body language that of a man who had just hit a jackpot. Sandra felt dizzy. Am I in a dream? A trance? A terrible nightmare? Her skin felt clammy. This was beyond humiliating. Would they sell her off like a commodity to this man? But to her greatest shock, Chief Martins did not look impressed by the grand welcome. His face was hard, cold, unamused. Then, his gaze turned to her father, his voice dripping with undisguised rage. My brother, he said, his tone sharp, I have only 2 questions for you. The atmosphere in the compound shifted. Sandra saw her mother's smile falter slightly. Her father cleared his throat, standing straighter. Go ahead, Chief, he said quickly, forcing a laugh. But Chief Martins was in no mood for pleasantries. Is it true that Sandra is already engaged and in courtship with one of her classmates in school? Silence. The tension thickened. Sandra's father blinked. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Answer me, sir. Chief Martins snapped. Her father stammered, but before he could put a response together, Sandra boldly turned to the chief herself. "Sir, where did you hear all this?" she asked, her voice strong. Chief Martins turned his gaze on her, and to her shock, he smiled faintly. "You did," he said simply. Sandra gasped. "You told me yourself, and I know you weren't lying." Her father's face reddened. "Ah, Chief," he said, laughing nervously. "You mean that small boy? That unserious pauper? That was just child's play. Boyfriend and girlfriend things. Nothing serious." Sandra's mouth fell open. "I never gave that boy any serious attention," her father continued. "Sandra is for you any time, any day. Just give us time, and she will come to her senses." Sandra clenched her fists. Anger burned in her chest. How could her own father deny everything and reduce her godly, honorable courtship to a meaningless affair? But Chief Martins was already shaking his head. His eyes were cold, unreadable. "I have heard enough," he muttered. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a complimentary card. Sandra's father eagerly stretched out his hands to receive it. "Speak to your daughter," Chief Martin said darkly. "If she's interested, let her apply as an executive officer in my company." Sandra's father nodded enthusiastically. Of course. I will talk to her, Chief. She will do as you say." But Chief Martins was already turning away. Without another word, he climbed into his car, slammed the door shut, and sped off, leaving behind a thick cloud of dust and a house full of stunned faces. Sandra's legs trembled. What just happened? She could still feel her father's eyes burning into her skin. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this battle was far from over. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. The moment Chief Martin's car disappeared down the street, Sandra's father flipped the complimentary card at her with such force that it almost struck her face. His hands trembled with rage. His chest heaved as though he was struggling to keep himself from cursing her aloud. "You ungrateful girl," he finally spat, his voice a deadly mix of anger and frustration. Sandra barely had time to process his words before her mother pounced on her. "You are a stubborn, incorrigible child," she shrieked. "You never know what is right for you. Always full of your own senseless schemes. How could you ruin this for us?" Sandra stood there, stunned, speechless. "Mummy, do you want me to become an ugly widow?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother snapped her fingers in disgust. "Widow, widow," she repeated mockingly. "Let me educate you, foolish girl. Chief Martin's widow will never know poverty. Do you hear me? It is better to be a widow of a rich man than to be the wife of a living pauper like David." Sandra felt a sharp pain in her chest. "So that's what this is about," she thought bitterly. "Money over my happiness, my future, my very life." She looked at her father, hoping, just hoping to see a flicker of hesitation, regret, anything. But his face was cold, unyielding. The family had staked everything on this, and she had just shattered their dreams. That night, no one ate. All the exotic delicacies her mother had prepared for Chief Martins, the stewed meats, the jollof rice, the fried plantains, the pounded yam, the richly seasoned soups were angrily tossed into the gutter. Sandra sat in her room, numb, bewildered. How could these people, her own parents, be so blinded by greed that they were willing to sell her off like a piece of furniture? She couldn't wait for morning to come. She needed to see David. Sandra arrived at David's small apartment just after sunrise, her face tired, her eyes shadowed. David took one look at her and knew something had happened. They sat down, and Sandra poured out everything. The rage, the insults, the ridiculous argument about being a rich widow. David listened quietly. When she finished, he let out a slow breath. "Sandra," he said, reaching for her hands, "this battle is not ours alone. We must continue to trust the one who has brought us this far." They both bowed their heads and offered a short but fervent prayer, thanking God for his deliverance and asking for continued guidance in the storm ahead. When they lifted their heads, Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out the chief's complimentary card. "What do I do with this?" she asked, holding it up between her fingers. David chuckled. "Well," he said, leaning back, "we could sell it for scrap paper, or make a bonfire out of it." Sandra laughed for the first time in days. She tore the card in half. David took the pieces and tore them again. Then they both smiled at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. By the time we reach even half the age of Chief Martins, Sandra said, grinning mischievously, we will be 10 times richer than he is. David stretched out his hand, and they shook on it. Deal, he said. With that, they each rose and returned to their respective homes, hearts lighter, faith stronger. Because they knew this was only the beginning. What do you think of Sandra's decision? Was it wise to tear the chief's offer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates. That same afternoon, as Sandra stepped into the house, she was met with a familiar, boisterous voice. Ah, the latest graduate in town. And she didn't even think it wise to come and see her day Uncle Sunday. Sandra froze for a moment, then smiled. Uncle Sunday, the only member of her family she could trust. Jovial, kind-hearted, and always looking out for her, yet with a reputation that made many women cautious. He was well known for his charming ways and marital infidelities, but his soft spot for Sandra had never wavered. Before she could respond, he was already pulling her into a warm embrace. You're even more beautiful than the last time I saw you, he said, grinning. But why are you just coming home at this hour? And why haven't you come to brief me about your life since you finished your service year? You're too big for me now, eh? Sandra chuckled lightly but said nothing. Uncle Sunday had always been protective of her, and she truly owed him gratitude. He was instrumental in securing the well-paying job she had during her service year. Anyway, he continued, patting her shoulder, I came with good news. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Good news. He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. There's an amazing opportunity waiting for you. A work and study program in South Africa. Fully funded. You will earn while you study, and trust me, Sandra, this is big. Sandra blinked, feeling a strange sensation crawl over her skin. South Africa, she repeated slowly. Yes, he nodded enthusiastically. Everything is already in place, but we need to finalize your travel documents quickly. Come to my house tomorrow, and we'll get everything sorted out. Sandra's gaze flickered across the room. Her father sat stiffly in his chair, pretending to be absorbed in the newspaper, yet she noticed how his hands tightened subtly around the edges. Her mother stood by the kitchen doorway, arms folded, eyes cold. No excitement. No smiles. No sign of joy or pride at such a life-changing opportunity being offered to their daughter. Sandra's stomach twisted with unease. Something was wrong, but she couldn't explain why or what. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. David, she thought. Tomorrow, I will tell David. He will make things clear. He always does. She forced a smile, nodded at Uncle Sunday, and replied, Okay, Uncle. I'll come. But deep within her, a tiny voice whispered, Be careful, Sandra. Be very careful. Morning arrived with its usual bustling energy at Sandra and David's small but thriving business center. The rhythmic clatter of keyboards, the soft hum of the photocopy machine, and the occasional chatter of customers filled the air. But Sandra barely noticed any of it. Her mind was tangled in confusion, unease, and unanswered questions. She had barely settled into her chair when she blurted out, David, I will be going to South Africa by the end of the month. David, who was arranging some documents on the counter, froze mid-motion. Then, in the next second, he let out a loud, Wow, that's incredible news. A broad smile lit up his face as he rushed to her side, gripping her hands excitedly. South Africa. Babe, this is amazing. Do you know what this means for you? For us, South Africa is a land of opportunities. So much better than here. Sandra remained silent. David, oblivious to her lack of enthusiasm, was already on a roll, his mind spinning with possibilities. You will get to meet influential people, expand our business connections, and maybe even start something bigger over there, he continued. And do you know what? I'll join you as soon as possible. Yes, South Africa will be our haven of escape from all this unnecessary drama, all the misunderstandings, all the pressure from your family and the church. It's a fresh start. Still, Sandra said nothing. Maybe, David added excitedly, We should even get married there. Yes. Away from all these people who don't want to see us happy. We can live our lives in peace, start our family in a place where no one knows our story. Sandra, this is perfect. Sandra stared at him blankly, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes vacant. David, still blissfully unaware of her lack of response, suddenly turned and rummaged through a drawer. Moments later, he pulled out a world map, his enthusiasm still at its peak. Look, he said, spreading the map open on the counter. Here it is, South Africa, right at the southernmost tip of the continent. He turned to her like a teacher explaining a geography lesson to a primary school pupil. See, it's a very developed country. You'll love it there. Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, all these places are booming with opportunities. And we can start fresh, babe. A whole new life. Sandra picked up her bag, and without uttering a single word, without looking at David, without saying goodbye, she walked out. David was still pointing at the map, still talking, still dreaming out loud until he realized the silence. He turned just in time to see Sandra's retreating figure, stepping out of the shop and disappearing down the street. A deep frown creased his forehead. What just happened? He had expected joy, excitement, shared dreams. But all he got was silence. A cold, deafening silence. And suddenly, a strange wave of uneasiness settled in his chest. Please subscribe and wait for the rest of the story in the next episode.